Well, I'm excited today to be with Bill Waldroop again. A little over a year ago, we did a video on Paul's journey across the Mediterranean and his shipwreck and the dynamics of all that. And Bill's had a lot of experience sailing across the seas. And a few weeks ago, we were having a conversation over lunch, and we were talking about Christ being the anchor of the soul, and through him and through God's work, that he is our anchor. That anchor is going to be tethered for all eternity and protects us and corrects us when we're off course. And we began to looking at just the dynamics of what an anchor does and how anchor is made and what it doesn't do and what it does do. And we began thinking, well, you know, this is time to do another video just on this. And Bill's had a lot of experience with anchors, and not only knowing people who've developed them, tested them, and been part of that, but began to see a real spiritual correlation. The word anchor appears about 6 or 7 times in the New Testament. All but one is in the book of Acts, and the only other time that it appears is in the book of Hebrews, chapter 6. And I'm going to read that passage in just a moment. But regardless of who the intended audience was, and there's debate who the audience was as far as the recipients of the book of Hebrews, and also a debate on who the writer was. But it's very interesting that the author in chapter 6 chose to use the term anchor as an illustration, a word picture as it were, to show us that we are tethered into the very holy of holies, and that through Christ and what God has accomplished through him, we will be tethered through all eternity. And so we're gonna focus on what anchors do, and really you're going to see a spiritual correlation with the fact that we're tethered into the very holy of holies, and I'm talking about the heavenly holy of holies. So just kind of put our conversation in context, I'm going to read from Hebrews chapter 6, and I'm going to begin verse 9 and read down through verse 20. Just to give us some context there. And I want to begin reading, in verse 9. But beloved, we are convinced of better things concerning you, things that accompany salvation, though we are speaking in this way. For God is not unjust so as to forget your work and the love which you have shown toward his name, in having ministered and in still ministering to the saints. And we desire that each one of you show the same diligence so as to realize the full assurance of hope until the end, so that you will not be sluggish, but imitators of those who through faith and patience inherit the promises. For when God made the promise to Abraham, and he's referring to the great promise that he made to Abraham that he would become a great nation, that God would give him a certain plot of land, and that through him all of the nations will be blessed. So for when God made the promise to Abraham, since he could swear by no one greater, he swore by himself, saying, I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply you. And so, having patiently waited, he obtained the promise. For men swear by one greater than themselves, or yet by one greater than themselves, and with them an oath given as confirmation is an end of every dispute. In the same way, God, desiring even more to show to the heirs of the promise the unchangeableness of his purpose, interposed with an oath, so that by 2 unchangeable things in which it is impossible for God to lie, we have taken refuge. We who have taken refuge would have strong encouragement to take hold of the hope set before us. This hope we have as an anchor of the soul, a hope both sure and steadfast, and one which enters within the veil, and that veil is the heavenly holy of holies, where Jesus has entered as a forerunner for us, having become a high priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. And so we see a beautiful picture here of the Abrahamic Covenant, the promise that God made to Abraham, the covenant and the fact that Abraham would become a great nation, and that through him all of the nations of the world would be blessed. And truly through faith in Jesus Christ we are blessed, and pointing to Christ, and pointing to the cross, pointing to the resurrection, pointing to the ascension. Jesus has entered into the heavenly holy of holies as a forerunner for us. And that hope that is spoken of here is not something that we hope to be so, but that we can rest in the assurance that it is so. And so right now, through faith in Jesus Christ, we are tethered to the very holy of holies. And so that anchor will hold forever. And that's what really drove me to think about this. And Bill, you and I, we think back a few months ago, that conversation that we had in the restaurant there over lunch, and began to talking about anchors. And as Bill talked about the anchors, I started seeing all of these. It's just a plethora of spiritual application, Bill. And I'm going to turn it over to you. You've had quite a bit of experience over the seas and with anchors. And
okay.
Yeah.
Yes, I've had a very good history of working offshore and on projects with Aker Marine Contractors. They were a mooring company, and they were at the forefront of anchor design, development, improvement. And so luckily I got to see and work with a lot of that. We installed some in the Gulf of Mexico, and as we were having lunch and just kind of mentioned, I think, the anchor, because I always talk about Paul's journey in Acts being such an important part of my life, because I see, Paul was a seasoned mariner. He wasn't in charge really, and he wasn't a mariner per se, but because of his many journeys, I mean, even the master of the vessel listened to him eventually, thank goodness, and saved all their lives. So Paul was just an incredible example to me, and the stability and the operation of offshore vessels. And when I got to thinking about it, they correlate so well to the old sailing ships, cargo vessels. And there's so many terms and conditions, and actually a drilling rig, some of the rigs that are non-self-propelled under tow have all the same problems that the sailing vessels had in those days. I mean, getting driven onto a lee shore, not having enough power to get through a storm, or breaking a tow line, or all the catastrophes that can happen. And I've seen a lot of those happen, and I can imagine what Paul and everyone on board that vessel was going through. And over the years, over the centuries, what those mariners have had go on in their lives. And then as we were talking about this over lunch, and I don't know how the word anchor came up, but all of a sudden you could say that, well, the anchor is such an important part of a ship. You've got to have one. You're not going to leave port without an anchor, are you?
That's right.
And when you get to where you need to go, you're going to need it, or sometimes before you get there, in a storm, in an emergency situation, you're going to have to drop an anchor. Or like in Paul's case, they're being driven by this furious storm, and they put out a drift anchor, which doesn't go down to bottom and hold you. It's just a huge drag. Sometimes they're made out of canvas. And you throw it out there, and it inhibits the speed of the vessel and also helps to control it. So they put out a drift anchor, and as Paul said, and then we were driven along by the storm. So it didn't stop them. They couldn't stop anywhere, but it helped control the direction and the speed at which they were going in. So anchors became a topic, and then the next thing you know, we're thinking about all the things that anchors do. and how anchors are a part of our life. I mean, it's in like it says in Hebrews, they're the anchor of the soul.
Yeah.
So it's just amazing. The development of the anchor over the years is just pretty amazing, and they have different methods now and different means of anchoring, but they all do the same thing.
Yeah.
They keep the vessel in place and solidly keep it where it needs to be, and that's the way an anchor of our soul. It keeps us in where we need to be for God. So,
you know what? When I think of an anchor, Bill, I never really thought that there were different kinds of anchors. I thought, there was just one kind that just anchors you down at the bottom and holds you in place, which that's what a lot of anchors do. But there are other types, as you begin talking about. And when I got to thinking about the anchor of the soul, our anchor, the anchor of the soul, does all of those of those things. And you of course, having a lot more experience, do you have an idea of how many types of anchors there are out there? And
yeah,
what
it's pretty amazing. There are. They started in the early days with just a big rock with a rope. You throw it over the side in shallow water, and it held you. Or some small canoes, they just put a stick down and into the bottom and then tie the stick to the side of the canoe or boat for fishing. But then it developed into what we call drag embedment anchors. They were the most popular, and they were around for literally thousands of years. And they had to have a rope, a cable, or something to pay out. And you had to have a scope on that anchor, basically about 6 times the water depth for optimum holding power. Wow. And if you didn't have enough line out, then when a storm came up, it would uplift the anchor and you would be pushed away. So it was important to have enough line out to where you always had a horizontal pull on the anchor, on the shank of the anchor. You don't want uplift in the early days. Years later, they came out and they designed anchors for vertical uplift, much bigger and better holding power, and finally got them approved by ABS, the classification societies, the Coast Guard, and that brought a whole new dynamics into the anchoring system. It went to Hooke's law of springs, really, instead of a drag embedment, where you had a component that had to be on bottom all the time. You had the anchor was uplifted, and there was no wire or rope on bottom. It was all uplifted, and so. By design, now you're in a kind of a spring situation, and it changed the resonance of the mooring system. Ocean engineers, naval architects are incredible at what they need to know and do. It goes beyond just having a weight or enough weight to hold something in position. You have to control the motions of the vessel, because sometimes you're drilling a hole in the ground, and too much motion, you won't be able to drill. You may hold on location, but you'll be sitting there waiting on weather to be able to drill a hole in the ground. So the more you can, the longer the shorter the time interval is for you to be able to drill, the more efficient that system has to be. So over the years, they developed new ways of anchoring. We came out with suction embedment plate anchors, where you just have a huge steel pile like a pipe, and it's closed on top, but you can go down and put a remote operated vehicle on it with a pump, and open a valve and put a vacuum on that whole huge, say, 10, 12 diameter pipe, And when you put a suction on it, it'll pull itself down into the mud, into the foundation. And on the bottom of it in a slot is a big steel plate with a pad eye on it. Very simple. So that plate becomes the anchor that's connected to the vessel. They have usually at least 8 of them in a symmetrical pattern around the vessel to hold it in all the different environmental conditions, whatever way the wind is going to blow or the waves and seas.
Wow.
So in the old day, and before that, if you had an anchor down there and you got it to hold really well, when you got ready to move, sometimes you couldn't get the anchor back. You would lose it, and they're quite expensive.
Yeah.
Well, now with a suction embedded plate anchor,
Wow.
you're just losing a steel plate with a pad eye on it. No big deal, not much money.
Wow.
So it revolutionized the mooring in a lot of parts of the world.
Yeah.
Made it much cheaper, quicker, and it was
amazing.
such a simple idea that
Yeah.
if I put a suction on that, it's going to suck it down. I wish I'd thought of that.
I'd patented it.
Yeah. So, but they've also come out with sensors. They can tell how deep the anchor is, which is important, and how deep it is in the foundation, because it may drag if it's not deep enough. And it also locates the anchor. They have direction finders for them now. You know exactly where the anchor is away from the vessel and how deep it is in the mud.
Bill, you know,
It's incredible.
just listening to you talk there, you know, I can just hear the spiritual implications, you know, what is referenced in Hebrews.
Right.
Hebrews gives us the information that we need to know, number one, where our anchor is,
Yeah.
and to what it is tethered,
Right.
and what's holding it.
Everything that's important about it.
everything that an anchor needs to do, the anchor of the soul does through Christ, and it holds us in place. It protects us.
Right.
But it also corrects us. I think an anchor
Right.
is designed to correct
Yeah.
too.
It can be a drift anchor to keep you from drifting too far, or to help control you in life.
When you read Hebrews 6, and just thinking about anchors, and I know that anchors at that time were different than the anchors that we have now, but they were still a fairly sophisticated mechanism.
They had flukes and a shank and parts of the anchor that basically we still use today. You know, they had the part that digs into the ground. They had it designed where it would roll over. When it got on bottom, it would roll over such that at least one of those points would dig into the mud.
Grasp.
So and that's been around for thousands of years.
It has, and it's very interesting that the author would use the word anchor, because let's say, for example, if his audience was around the Sea of Galilee, certainly they would understand what an anchor was and how important it was. I've been at and near the Sea of Galilee, especially in the afternoons when the wind really picks up. And if you did not have an anchor while you're on the Sea of Galilee, you're going to be blown wherever the wind sends you. That's where you're going to end up. And I personally wouldn't want to be out on the Sea of Galilee during that time, because the wind just slowly builds some days, and by the evening time, it's just not a place that you want to be out there. But they would understand and appreciate, and even if you didn't have your own boat, just knowing that fishing was very important. It probably drove a lot of the economy there, and so either directly or indirectly, you're going to appreciate the function of an anchor. But when you look at Paul and look how important that seamanship was in that day, because the Mediterranean was just a few miles away from Jerusalem, for example, or even from the Sea of Galilee.
Yeah.
It wasn't that far. And of course, you had merchant shipping and passenger shipping and all of that. So for him to use this image of our hope and the anchor of the soul in the very Holy of Holies, that's where God dwells. You know, when God gave Moses the dimensions of the tabernacle, it was a pattern based on the original, and the original's in heaven. And we learn in Hebrews 9 that Jesus entered in to the heavenly Holy of Holies and sat down at the right hand of God. And so he, being the forerunner, is referenced in chapter 6 here. That's where our anchor is. So we know where it is. We know what's holding us. We know how it's holding us. And that even in the storms of life that we experience, regardless of what they are, we know that our anchor holds. You know. And what comes to your mind? I know that I'm trying to put myself into the mind of the people of that day, but you have a great advantage being a mariner. But you know, having read that, what hits you and speaks to you when you read that?
Well, you know, what really stood out in my mind when we started talking at lunch, you know, I've been around anchors probably 40 years of my life, and they're just an integral part of our operation. We have to have the vessels I was on, the semi-submersible drilling units, usually had 8 anchors symmetrically around the rig to be able to withstand and resist the waves, environmental conditions, wind, waves, and weather. And then when we just started, it just kind of like a light comes on. You think, well, you know, these anchors are resisting the wind, waves, and weather, everything that pushes against that platform. Well, the anchor of hope and the anchor, as in Hebrews, does that for us. We have the hope and the knowledge and the faith that God is our anchor and that He is going to help us withstand all of these, the temptations, the storms of life, the things that are always pushing against us from the day we're born until the day we die. You know, Satan never gives up. And it just kind of came to me that, well, the anchor is pretty important, not only on the vessels I've worked on, but in our lives. And
just excellent observations and applications, because we do have an enemy of the soul, but more importantly, we have an anchor of the soul.
We have the means to withstand it.
And we're held in position. We're held in relationship. We're held in fellowship, and will ultimately be held throughout eternity, because that anchor is an eternal one, and we know it doesn't break. It will never fail, and we can rest in the fact that because of that anchor, that we're held on course. And it's just beautiful spiritual applications of an anchor.
In the anchoring that we, like in the North Sea, one thing we're always doing, we're monitoring the tension. We had a tension monitoring system, and we know that we have tested that anchor to a certain amount. In the North Sea, with the 15-ton anchors we had, drilling for BP, they had to be tested to resist 350,000 pounds of pull. So we'd watch the meter, we'd slowly pull on the line and pull the anchor, the wire in, or the chain, until it got up to 350,000 pounds, and then we stopped, and it had to hold there. We usually had to hold at least an hour or so. Okay, the anchor is holding. And that's a long process that we have to do for each anchor. We have 8 of them. We have to test all the pre-tensioning and testing can go on for a day or two before you can drill a hole in the ground. But with God, we don't have to wait, do we?
No, we don't.
We know that anchor is going to hold. We know that whatever storm comes up, we're still safe.
Yes.
We're in a good environment with Him. We're not going to be blown off location, pushed onto a lee shore, or have anything bad happen to us. We can rely on the anchor of God. That's the difference between
and that anchor,
man's anchors and God's anchor.
And that anchor has been tested and proven over and over. And of course, Christ Himself, tempted in all points as we are, yet without sin, He was tested. Willingly, graciously went to the cross. He could have called down heaven's armies, and yet He didn't. And He chose, because of the joy set before Him, He chose death, so that we may be reconciled to God, that we may be redeemed, not only rescued but kept. And you see that anchor. The anchor is such an important part of not only the keeping, but ultimately the saving, rescuing, and preserving of what is valuable. If you didn't have anchors, your equipment's going to be lost. Everything that is value and everything that is worth is going to be lost. And we can see so many angles, facets, and implications and applications of the anchor of the soul and of anchors and the beautiful correlation there, because it's real in our lives. And when you trust Christ as your Savior, you're never the same. And God keeps you. We are preserved. We're protected. We are corrected and directed as well. And over time, I think more and more you rest in knowing that your anchor is secure and it holds. And so, regardless of, as you say, what comes our way, whether it's health, whether it's new life, whether it's death, regardless of the circumstances in our lives, we are kept. And we are tethered to the very Holy of Holies, which gives us unrestricted and unlimited access to God, and we'll never fail.
Absolutely,
we'll never fail.
And, it's. I mean, it's funny. I worked with them all these years, and then it took kind of that lunch to open my eyes about how important it was in our lives, not only offshore in the sea, but in life itself.
Yeah. There's no just no comparison there when you look at the earthly anchors and you look at the heavenly anchor. But the wheels in my mind started turning too. When you started talking about anchors, I said, "My goodness, there are just so many spiritual applications there to our own life." And I hope folks that watch this video can see that imagery for their own lives and know that where they're tethered, where their anchor is, and that it's one that's going to hold for all eternity. For all eternity.
Absolutely.
Bill, not being a mariner, sometimes I don't even know the questions to ask, and as based, just going through our discussion and stuff, is there something that maybe I've missed or you've thought of as we think about the implications and applications of anchors, and just something that we haven't covered and thought about?
Well, let's see. I think we pretty well covered it. I think back at some things that I've had happen, where you've had anchors dragging and you're worried about being adrift. But overall, I think we've pretty well covered it. And just the knowledge just the knowledge that God is the anchor
Yeah.
of our soul,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
that it's so much more secure than what we as humans have to rely on.
Yes.
Like in the North Sea, which is a terrible place to be
Mm.
in the wintertime especially. And that's one of the things, because you're always out there. We were up in the Arctic Circle, even 600 miles from anything, and we had to rely on our anchoring system. And we had one rig, an older type vessel, that was designed with wire instead of chain. And wire just isn't near as good because it doesn't have the weight. And this particular rig would break loose every year and be floating around in the North Sea somewhere.
Oh my goodness.
And the joke in the Aberdeen, Scotland office was, anyone know where the D is? The 135D was the vessel, and they'd have to send planes out and find it, and then send towing vessels out to bring it back
Yeah.
and re-anchor it.
Yeah.
So
I chuckle at that, but that's a dangerous thing.
I know, and these guys on board, they're being driven by the environmental forces, and that they have no control over them. They're not propelled by any machinery, and they're being driven by the waves and winds, and hoping that somebody will find them and come and hook a tow line on them before they run aground somewhere. So,
Again, it's startling that can happen and does happen, but at the same time, you look at the spiritual applications for us that we're kept from drifting.
Yeah, we don't have that worry.
We don't have that worry. We already know that we're found, we're tethered, we're anchored. And Bill, I so appreciate you taking the time and just sharing your knowledge and
I
your
loved
insight.
it. I'm just glad that the conversation we had kind of brought it up and sparked an interest. And
well, I think the Holy Spirit just
Yeah,
stirred both of our hearts and thought,
grabbed
boy,
both
this,
of us
this
and
is
said,
something
"Hey,
needs to be shared.
yeah, I need to
and
talk
talked
about it." Absolutely, yeah.
So I so appreciate it, and so appreciate Linda's effort too,
Yeah.
in helping us with that. So I know she's working in the background, but so appreciate
Oh, we're glad
both
to do
of
it.
you,
Yeah.
and we too. I'll turn to the camera and say I hope that you find a blessing in this video, and that your faith is in Christ, and that you can know for sure that your soul is anchored in the Holy of Holies, and through Him, He is the anchor of the soul. God knows where we are. We never drift off course. He has us tethered to Himself. We're in relationship. We're in fellowship with Him, and that anchor that has been tested over and over has always been proven never to fail, and will hold us for all eternity. So, and if you don't know Christ as your Savior, trust Him right now, because He, the Son of God, died for you, paid your sin debt in full, rose again, seated at the right hand of the Father. He's already gone in, as I read earlier, as a forerunner for us into the very heavenly Holy of Holies, behind the veil, and is seated at the right hand of the Father right now. He wants to save you, He wants to embrace you, and He wants to anchor you along with Him, that for all eternity. God bless you, and again, I hope you do find this video helpful. And Bill, again, thank you, my brother.
Yes, and I would, just as an aside, I'd like to give credit to Rick Lochner as well.
Oh, yes.
He was at our lunch, and he also knows a lot about offshore life. And,
he does.
And anchoring. So the three of us actually started this conversation, which ended up with this video.
It sure did. It sure did. Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you, Rick.
We may need to grab Rick in on one of these conversations, because there's a lot of application, even out in the oil field, and especially on the high seas, that have to do with just interesting correlations with our spiritual life.
Absolutely.
So, Rick, we'll see you soon.
Yep.